the way media portrays all this helps to shape the way that Americans think of what fatherhood is, how fathers are supposed to act, and what they do, and it creates a negative image in our head for even the fathers who are in the home, right? That's the whole point of media, is to create these things, right? Good, bad, or indifferent, that's what media does. So one of the things that we need to understand is that not only is that a bad example, but we have to combat that in our own psyche and in that of the world around us if we want to be a good father. In order to do that, there are a few different things that we have to do. Well, let's talk about the necessity first. So, since about the 70s, with the Johnson administration and the increase in the welfare state, the government has subsidized fathers out of the home, right? They give a stipend for the absence of the father in a way that makes it seem like it's okay, but it's really not, right? It incentivizes broken relationships by allowing monetary gain or monetary gain for each child that's in the home. There's no reason to keep the father there. The government has become the daddy in many ways. And the problem with that is, one, it's not biblical, but two, it creates relationship problems. For boys, that manifests in a couple different ways. And one of those is that a boy is just wild, right? My own son, you guys probably see him running around every once in a while. He can be pretty wild. I've worked with boys for a long time in another program, and you have to rein him in. You got to give them clear boundaries. They have to understand how far they can go and what those boundaries entail, and then what happens if they cross those boundaries, right? If there's no strong male figure in the home, it's very hard for a woman to set those boundaries and keep them. It becomes exhausting, right? Along with everything else that they have to do, now they have to do this as well. And if you have a boy like mine, like I was as a kid, who's a little strong-willed and wants to push the boundaries every chance they get, that becomes a problem. And because at some point in time they're going to get bigger and stronger than their mom, then who's going to rein them in? If there's no strong male figure there, they're just going to go wild. So this creates a vacuum of leadership within the home. In doing so, it allows that boy to run wild and go do his things. What's the problem? What do boys want to run wild and do? Men kill people and break things. That's what men are designed to do, right? Hunt, fish, provide, war. Those are the typical things that men are created to do, right? A boy does that in miniature, right? Think about what boys do, the games that they play, right? They play war games, whether it's video games or it's out in the woods, right? You know, they're running around. It's cowboys and Indians. It's cops and robbers. It's army. Nobody plays Navy, right? It's all things like that. It's not something, they're not docile creatures that can just do things, which is why we have some of the problems in our schools. That's a different story. So they want to be wild, and that's fine, but you have to harness that. And it takes a man to harness that. A woman is not going to be able to harness that most of the time. There are exceptions, but most of the time. What happens when there's not a strong father figure in the home? Those boys are considerably more likely to be violent offenders. The vast majority of the violent offender population in the prisons in the United States today are from fatherless homes, where they didn't have that father figure. Gang membership, much more likely to come from fatherless homes because they're seeking that connection, right? You get that in gangs. You get it in other places too. You can get it in the Army. You could probably get it in the Navy. I'd have to ask those guys. But, you can get it in other ways. Fraternal organizations, right? Frat houses. But what happens there? What happens in a frat house? What's the normal thing that people think of as raging parties, right? And then what happens with that? It gets out of control. And then from there, what happens? You get into gang rapes and you get into other things right? Which is the natural tendency of boys when they're not properly raised.